There is a hospital room in Denver, Colorado. It is quiet in the way that only hospital rooms are quiet. The steady beep of a monitor, the soft hiss of oxygen, the muffled sound of nurses moving in the hallway outside. And in the bed lies a mountain of a man, 400 pounds at his peak, 6'4", a body that once folded human beings in half for a living, hands that had crushed the will out of the toughest men on the planet, a frame so massive, so intimidating, that grown adults used to freeze in fear when he lumbered toward them wearing a mask of red and black leather. But there is no mask now, no entrance music, no roaring crowd chanting his name. There is just a tired old warrior, his enormous chest rising and falling, fighting the one opponent he could never body slam, never splash, never beat into submission. An opponent that had been circling him for 2 long years. An opponent that a pair of doctors had promised would come for him, right on schedule, his own heart. For 30 years, he had been the most feared big man in professional wrestling, a monster in Japan, a world champion in America, a living nightmare who could do a moonsault off the top rope at 450 pounds. To millions of fans, he was the closest thing the sport ever had to an actual movie villain come to life. And now, in his final 48 hours, that same man was being asked to do something he had spent his entire life refusing to do. He was being asked to let go. A man who was told he had 2 years to live, and who then spent those 2 years defying that sentence with everything he had. We are going to trace the collapse in Tokyo that should have stopped him and didn't. The open-heart surgery that saved him and then nearly killed him. The quiet infection that crept in when nobody was looking. And the last night in that Denver hospital, when a heart that had carried a giant across the world for 6 decades finally decided it had given enough. His name was Leon Allen White, but the world knew him as Vader. Leon White was born on May 14, 1955 in Linwood, California. From the very beginning, he was big. Not just tall, but broad, thick, powerful in a way that separated him from other kids his age. And in America, when a boy is built like that, there is one place the world funnels him: the football field. White was a natural. He grew into a monster of an offensive lineman, and by the time he reached the University of Colorado, he was one of the best centers in the entire country. He earned second-team All-American honors in 1977. Scouts drooled over him. Here was a young man with the size of a truck and the feet of a much smaller athlete, a rare specimen. In the 1978 NFL Draft, the Los Angeles Rams selected Leon White in the 3rd round, 80th overall, his hometown team. A dream scenario for a California kid. And he made it count, working his way onto a Rams roster that would go all the way to Super Bowl 14 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Think about that for a moment. Before he ever put on a wrestling mask, before he ever stepped foot in Japan, Leon White had already stood on the biggest stage American football had to offer. He had already reached a summit that most players spend their entire careers chasing and never touch. But football is a cruel sport, and it takes as much as it gives. A knee injury cut his NFL career short. 2 seasons in, and the dream was over. The Rams moved on. The game moved on. And Leon White was left with a broken body and no clear idea of what came next. For a lot of men, that is where the story quietly ends. The washed-out athlete. The what could have been. But Leon White was not built to disappear. He was built to be Vader. Someone suggested professional wrestling. It made sense on paper. He was enormous, he was athletic, and he had the kind of natural presence that made people look twice. He began training under Brad Rheingans, a respected technician, and made his debut in the American Wrestling Association in 1985 under the name Baby Bull. He was raw, he was learning, but anyone with eyes could see the potential. A 400-pound man who could move like that did not come along every day. And then he went to Japan. And everything changed. In Japan, Leon White became Big Van Vader. He was given the mask, the red and black leather webbing that would define his image for the rest of his life. He was given the smoke, the entrance, the whole theatrical monster gimmick. And he took that gimmick, and he made it real. Because there was nothing fake about the way Vader hit people. New Japan Pro Wrestling had never seen anything like him. The Japanese wrestling audience prized what they called strong style, a stiff, hard-hitting, believable form of combat. And here came this enormous American who hit harder than anyone, who threw his body around with reckless disregard, who bludgeoned opponents with clubbing blows that echoed through the arena. In December of 1987, Vader did the unthinkable. He faced Antonio Inoki, the single most beloved and legendary figure in the entire history of Japanese wrestling. Inoki was riding a long, unbeaten streak. He was a national icon, practically a god to the fans in that building, and Vader beat him. The reaction was chaos. The crowd could not process what they had just seen. Their hero, felled by this masked American monster. Fans rioted. The situation got so out of hand that New Japan was actually banned from running the prestigious Sumo Hall as a result. That is how much of an impact one man made in a single night. To understand why that mattered so much, you have to understand what Japanese wrestling was in that era. This was not the cartoonish, larger-than-life American product. This was strong style, a brutal, physical, believable form of combat where the strikes were real, the throws were dangerous, and the audience treated the results with the same seriousness as a legitimate sport. The Japanese fans did not want to be entertained by a monster. They wanted to be convinced by one. And Vader convinced them. He hit harder than the Japanese stars. He moved better than a man his size had any right to. He became the foreign invader that an entire nation both dreaded and could not stop watching. In a wrestling culture that respected toughness above all else, this enormous masked American became one of the most respected foreigners ever to set foot in the country. Vader was not just a wrestler in Japan, he was an event, a force of nature. He became the IWGP Heavyweight Champion, the top prize in the company, and he held it multiple times. He was the gaijin, the foreign wrestler, that Japanese audiences both feared and could not look away from. And then there is the match that has become the stuff of pure wrestling legend. A 1990 encounter with the American cowboy Stan Hansen, another famously stiff, dangerous brawler. During that match, something went horribly wrong. Vader took a shot that dislodged his eye from its socket. Let that sink in. His eye came out of his head, in the middle of the match. And Vader, being who he was, pushed the eye back into place and finished the match anyway. That single story tells you everything you need to know about the man. Where a normal human being sees a catastrophic, career-threatening, potentially blinding injury, Vader saw an inconvenience. Something to be pushed back into place so the show could go on. His pain tolerance, his toughness, his sheer refusal to stop, was something that existed on a different level than ordinary people. By 1990, that reputation had made its way back to America, and World Championship Wrestling came calling. WCW put Vader front and center. And in the early 1990s, he became one of the most dominant world champions the company ever had. He was the WCW World Heavyweight Champion. He feuded with the biggest names in the business. He battled Sting in a series of brutal physical wars that fans still talk about. He tangled with Ric Flair, the dirtiest player in the game. He had unforgettable blood-soaked encounters with a young Cactus Jack, the wrestler the world would later know as Mick Foley, in matches so violent they helped make Foley a legend. And here is what separated Vader from every other giant the business had ever produced. He did not just clobber people, he flew. This 450-pound man would climb to the top rope and come off it with a moonsault, a rolling backflip that he called the Vader Saw. That kind of move belonged to smaller, lighter Japanese and Mexican high flyers. It did not belong to a man the size of a refrigerator, but Vader did it anyway, and he made it look almost graceful, a jaw-dropping contradiction that no one who saw it ever forgot. He could squash you flat with a splash, and then, if the moment called for it, he could defy gravity in a way that made you question everything you thought you knew about what a big man could do. Vader was the monster at the top of the mountain, the immovable object, the guy the heroes had to somehow overcome. And week after week, he made them look like they had survived a car crash just to get in the ring with him. In 1996, Vader arrived in the World Wrestling Federation, debuting at the Royal Rumble, the biggest company in the world. The brightest lights, He feuded with Shawn Michaels. He clashed with The Undertaker. He continued to be exactly what he had always been, an enormous, believable, terrifying threat. He even branched out beyond wrestling. A whole generation of kids who never watched a single match knew Vader from his recurring role on the sitcom Boy Meets World, where his sheer size was played for comedy. The monster of the ring, sitting in a suburban living room. It worked because of the contrast, because everyone understood, on some instinctive level, that this was a genuinely dangerous man. And that danger, that willingness to put his body through anything, came with a price. A price that would come due decades later, in a hospital bed in Denver. Because the same toughness that made Vader a legend was quietly destroying him from the inside. In a 2011 interview with WWE, White laid out the damage in plain terms. By that point in his life, he had undergone 45 surgeries. He had suffered 19 concussions. And at one point, during his years in Japan, he had spent 33 days in a coma. 45 surgeries, 19 concussions, 33 days unconscious in a hospital in a foreign country. This is the invoice that a body like Vader's eventually receives. Every splash off the top rope, every clubbing forearm, every time he pushed his own eye back into its socket and kept going, it all got written down somewhere, in the tissue and the bone and the muscle of a man who never learned how to protect himself, because protecting himself was not in his nature. He also fought private battles. He struggled with drinking over the years. He carried the weight, literally and figuratively, of a life spent as one of the largest and most physically abused athletes on the planet. And through all of it, he kept going. Because stopping was never something Vader knew how to do. That is the cruel irony sitting at the center of his whole story. The very qualities that made Vader a legend were the same qualities that were killing him. The refusal to protect himself. The willingness to take any bump, any shot, any risk. The pride that pushed an eye back into a socket rather than stop a match. Every fan who marveled at his toughness was, without knowing it, watching a man spend down his own body, one collision at a time. The reputation was built on damage. And the damage does not disappear when the crowd goes home. It accumulates. It waits. It settles into the heart and the brain and the joints of a man who gave everything and never once thought about the invoice. But bodies keep score, and in November of 2016, the bill finally came due. That was the month Leon White went to see his heart doctors, and what they told him would set the clock ticking on everything that came after. They told him his heart was worn out from a lifetime of football and wrestling, from the enormous physical toll of carrying and slamming a 400-pound frame through decades of combat. They diagnosed him with congestive heart failure. And then they delivered the sentence that no one is ever ready to hear. According to White, 2 separate heart doctors told him the same thing. His time was limited. He had at most about 2 years left to live, and here is where you learn something about the difference between Vader and everyone else. Because most people, receiving that news, would break down, would go quiet, would start putting their affairs in order. Vader got angry. He said later that when he was told his heart was failing and that he had 2 years or less, his first reaction was fury. He said this had to be nonsense because he did not feel bad. He remembered getting extremely angry at the very idea. In his mind, a man who felt strong could not possibly be dying. The two things did not fit together. That anger was pure Vader. It was the same defiance that pushed an eyeball back into a socket and kept wrestling. The same defiance that took a beating and refused to fall. Faced with a death sentence, his instinct was not to accept it. It was to fight it, to rage against it, to treat his own failing heart like just another opponent who thought he could beat the monster. He shared the news publicly, tweeting out that 2 heart doctors had told him his heart was worn out from football and wrestling, and that he had been given less than 2 years to live. He wrote that he was only now allowing this to become part of his reality. The wrestling world reacted with an outpouring of love and disbelief. Fans who had feared him for decades suddenly found themselves praying for him. Fellow wrestlers sent their support. Mick Foley, the man who had bled buckets across the ring from Vader, immediately began publicly campaigning for him to finally be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame while he was still alive to appreciate it. But Vader would later admit he regretted the tweet. He said he wished he had never put it out there. He did not want to be the dying man. He did not want the sympathy, the pity, the sense that the clock was running. He wanted to be Vader. He wanted to keep going, the way he always had. And keep going is exactly what he did. Because here is the part of the story that gets lost in the sadness of the ending. When Leon White was told he had 2 years to live, he did not spend those 2 years lying down. He spent them fighting like a man possessed. A wrestling legend named Diamond Dallas Page reached out to him. Page had reinvented himself in his later years as a fitness guru, helping broken-down wrestlers reclaim their health and their lives. He contacted White and told him he had heard about his heart problems and that he wanted to help. White agreed. In January of 2017, he traveled to Atlanta to start working with Page. The goal was enormous and fitting for a man of his size. He wanted to lose 100 pounds. He was sitting at around 375 to 380 pounds at the time, and he set out to strip that weight off and give his failing heart a fighting chance. He got in the gym. He did cardio, 45 minutes to an hour a day. He walked, he cycled, he lifted. He talked about upcoming bookings, about autograph signings, about still having wrestling matches left in him. This was not a man preparing to die. This was a man preparing to fight. And there was something profoundly moving about the pairing. Diamond Dallas Page had spent his later years making it his mission to pull broken-down wrestlers back from the brink, to give away the gift of health to the very men whose bodies the business had chewed up. Page reached out to Vader not because there was money in it, but because he had heard one of the toughest men in the history of the sport was in trouble, and he could not stand by and watch. 2 aging warriors, one trying to save the other. It was the kind of loyalty that exists inside the wrestling brotherhood in ways outsiders rarely see. And Vader, the monster who had terrified everyone, humbled himself and accepted the help. And he had already survived things that year that would have killed a lesser man. He had been in a rollover car accident, coming home from a shopping trip, taking a turn too late and flipping his vehicle twice. The entire roof of the car caved in right where his head was. His face was so swollen and battered afterward that he described his head as being nearly twice its normal size, his eyes black and blue. He walked away from that too. Of course he did. He was Vader. There was a phrase he kept coming back to during this period, a phrase that tells you everything about how he saw his own mortality. He said he would love to die in the ring. He meant it. To Vader, the ring was not a job. It was his first true love. It was the place where he made the most sense, where the mask and the smoke and the monster were real, where 4 decades of pain finally had a purpose. If death was coming for him regardless, then he wanted it to find him where he belonged. In front of the fans. Under the lights. Doing the only thing he had ever truly wanted to do. And in April of 2017, in Tokyo, that wish very nearly came true. It was a special show, an event celebrating the 45th anniversary of the career of the Japanese legend Tatsumi Fujinami. A fitting stage. Vader was booked in a 6-man tag team match, teaming with Keiji Muto and Akira against Fujinami, Riki Choshu, and Shiro Koshinaka. A gathering of legends. A love letter to the strong-style era that had made Vader a god in that country. Right at the start of the match, something went wrong. Vader was dropped on his head. A hard, dangerous landing for any wrestler, and a potentially catastrophic one for a man in his condition. He kept going, because he was Vader, and Vader kept going. He finished the match. He soaked in the appreciation of a Japanese crowd that had loved him for 30 years. And then, once it was over, he collapsed. He went down. He was, by his own later account, knocked out cold. In a building full of people who revered him, the monster of New Japan fell. The initial fear, naturally, was his heart. Everyone knew about the congestive heart failure. Everyone knew about the 2-year sentence. It seemed like the tragic, obvious explanation. But Vader pushed back on that story almost immediately. He insisted it had nothing to do with his heart. It was his head, he said. He had been dropped on it at the start of the match, and that was what put him down. He thanked the Japanese wrestling world. He told everyone how much he loved it. But whether he wanted to admit it or not, something had shifted. That six-man tag in Tokyo would be the last match of Big Van Vader's career. More than 3 decades of destruction, of championships, of blood and smoke and legend, and it all ended on the canvas of a Japanese ring, in front of the fans who had loved him first and loved him best. In a strange, sideways way, he had gotten a version of the ending he had asked for. Not death in the ring, but the end of Vader in the ring. The retirement was messy and emotional, the way these things often are. In June of 2017, White posted a tweet so raw and cryptic that fans struggled to decode it. He wrote, in his own broken and heartfelt way, about leaving his firstborn, his greatest love of all, for a chance to exist on the same plane of existence as his grandchildren yet to come. Read that again, and the meaning breaks your heart. His first love, his greatest love. That was wrestling. That was Vader. And he was saying goodbye to it, walking away from the only thing he had ever truly wanted to do for one reason and one reason only, so that he might live long enough to meet grandchildren who had not even been born yet. For a man who wanted to die in the ring, choosing to leave it was the single greatest sacrifice he could make. It was Leon White finally putting the man ahead of the monster, choosing family over the fight, choosing the future over the thing he loved. He would spend the next year chasing that future with everything he had left. By early 2018, the fight had reached its most critical phase. The congestive heart failure that had been diagnosed back in November of 2016 was closing in on the 2-year mark the doctors had predicted, and White's medical team decided on a dramatic intervention: open heart surgery. This was the big gamble, the all-or-nothing play. A chance to fix the failing heart, to buy real time, to potentially rewrite the sentence he had been given. But open-heart surgery on a 62-year-old man with a lifetime of physical trauma, a man carrying enormous weight and decades of damage, was a serious risk. This was not a sure thing. This was a coin flip with his life on the table. In March of 2018, Leon White went under the knife. And on March 26th, his son Jesse gave the world an update through his father's account. He wrote that he had just spoken with the surgeon. The surgery was a success. But it had been worse than they had expected. It was going to be a long road to recovery. He thanked everyone for their prayers. A success. But worse than expected. A long road. Those words carried a quiet warning inside them. Yes, the immediate crisis had been survived. Yes, the surgeons had done their work. But the situation on the table had been more dire than anyone had anticipated. Vader's heart, his body, the whole battered machine was in worse shape than even the doctors had prepared for. Still, in the weeks that followed, there was genuine hope. Real optimism. White spoke to the press and said he was feeling better. He talked about looking forward to getting back to things. By early May, he was publicly reflecting on the successful surgery and telling people that his outlook was improving. After a lifetime of being told his time was running out, it finally seemed like Vader might actually beat the clock. Like he might make it to those grandchildren after all. He had survived football. He had survived the coma in Japan. He had survived the rollover car crash. He had survived the eye coming out of his head. He had survived 45 surgeries and 19 concussions. And now it looked like he had survived the biggest surgery of them all. The monster, it seemed, simply would not die. But the human body is a fragile thing, even a body as legendary as Vader's. And it was not the heart that struck the next blow. It was something quieter. Something that slips into hospitals and preys on the weak and the recovering. Something that a man rebuilding from major heart surgery is dangerously vulnerable to. Roughly a month before the end, Leon White was diagnosed with a severe case of pneumonia. Pneumonia, an infection in the lungs. On its own, in a healthy person, often survivable. But this was not a healthy person. This was a man who was already recovering from open-heart surgery that had gone worse than expected. A man with a heart the doctors had already declared worn out. A man whose entire system was fighting on multiple fronts at once. Pneumonia in that condition was not a minor complication. It was a mortal threat. He was taken back to the hospital in Colorado, back into the bed, back onto the monitors, and the fight that had defined the last 2 years of his life entered its final, desperate round. And here is the thing about Vader. He fought this one exactly like he fought everything else. Hard, relentlessly, refusing to go quietly. His family would later say that he fought extremely hard against the pneumonia. And more than that clinically, he was actually making progress. The infection was severe, but he was battling it, and the numbers, the medical markers, the things the doctors watch were moving in the right direction. For a while, it looked like the monster might survive this one too. Like he might drag himself out of yet another situation that should have killed him. Which brings us to the final 48 hours. Picture that room in Denver in the middle of June of 2018. Picture the man in the bed. Not the masked monster the fans remember, but Leon White, 63 years old, worn down by 6 decades of collision and sacrifice. His enormous body a map of everything he had ever survived. For the better part of a month, he had been grinding through the pneumonia. Clinically making progress, the doctor said. That phrase would echo painfully in the days to come. Making progress, getting better. The oxygen, the antibiotics, the monitoring, all of it seeming to work. His family holding on to hope. The wrestling world, largely unaware of just how serious things had gotten, still assuming that Vader, of all people, would pull through. He always pulled through. 2 years earlier, 2 doctors had told him he had 2 years to live. And now, in June of 2018, that window was closing. But he was still here, still fighting, still, in the language of the hospital, making progress. There is something almost unbearable about that. To be so close, to have the surgery declared a success, to have the pneumonia numbers trending the right way, to have survived so many things that no one should survive, and to be, right up until the final hours, a man the doctors described as improving. Imagine being in that room during those final 2 days. The family holding vigil, the quiet conversations with the doctors, the careful reading of every number on every monitor, searching for reasons to hope, and finding them. He is making progress, they were told. The infection is severe, but he is fighting it, and he is winning ground. After everything this man had survived, it must have felt not just possible but likely that he would survive this too. That any hour now the giant would open his eyes, crack that familiar half-smile, and start talking about getting back to the gym. Because that is what Vader always did. He always came back. He had spent his whole life on the edge of catastrophe and walking away. The eye that came out and went back in. The head that got dropped on the mat in Tokyo. The car that flipped twice with him inside it. Time after time, Vader had stared down the thing that was supposed to end him. And time after time, he had refused. His body had absorbed punishment that would have destroyed anyone else, and he had simply gotten back up. But every warrior, no matter how great, eventually fights a battle he cannot win. Every streak ends. Every monster, in the end, is still a man. On the night of Monday, June 18, 2018, in that hospital in Denver, Colorado, after a month of fighting the pneumonia, after 2 years of fighting his own heart, after a lifetime of fighting anyone and anything that stood in his way, Leon White's heart finally had enough. At approximately 7:25 in the evening, it stopped. Not the pneumonia, in the end. His son would put it in words that were almost poetic in their simplicity. His father had fought extremely hard, and clinically, he had been making progress. But on Monday night, his heart had enough. And it was his time. His heart had enough. After everything it had carried. After every splash and slam and collision, after every mile of every road, every arena in every country, every impossible night, the monster refused to fall. The heart that 2 doctors had declared worn out back in November of 2016 finally, quietly, stopped carrying the giant. The 2-year sentence had been almost exactly right. From the diagnosis in November of 2016 to the last breath in June of 2018, it was about 19 months. Right there in the window the doctors had drawn. As if his body had been counting down the entire time, as if the clock they set in that examination room had been ticking behind everything, behind the DDP workouts and the Tokyo collapse and the open heart surgery and the pneumonia. All of it, in the end, unfolding almost precisely on schedule. The news did not become public immediately. It was 2 days later, on June 20th, that Vader's son Jesse shared the devastating update through his father's account. He wrote that it was with a heavy heart that he had to inform everyone that his father, Leon White, had passed away on Monday night at approximately 7:25 in the evening. He explained the pneumonia diagnosis from a month earlier. He described how hard his father had fought and how he had been making clinical progress. And then those final words, that on Monday night, his heart had enough, and it was his time. And the wrestling world, which had feared this man and then prayed for this man, broke. The tributes came flooding in from every corner of the industry. WWE released a statement expressing its sadness at the loss of Leon White, the man their audiences knew as Vader. Wrestlers who had shared the ring with him, wrestlers who had watched him as kids, promoters, fans across the entire globe, all of them reaching out at once to mourn a man who had felt for so long genuinely indestructible. There was a particular kind of grief in it, because Vader had never gotten the one honor that so many felt he had long deserved. Despite his decades of dominance, despite being a multiple-time world champion in America and a god in Japan, despite everything he had given to the business, Leon White had never been inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame during his lifetime. Mick Foley had campaigned for it. Fans had demanded it, and it had not happened before he died. The man who had made so many stars, who had bled and sacrificed for the industry across 3 continents, was gone before the sport's biggest company gave him its highest honor. It is one of those bitter footnotes that clings to the end of a great career. The sense of a debt left unpaid. The knowledge that the recognition, when and if it ever came, would arrive too late for him to feel it. But maybe the truest measure of Vader was never going to be found on a Hall of Fame plaque. Maybe it was found in that final stretch of his life, in the way he handled the ending. Because think about what those last 2 years actually were. A man is told, flatly, by 2 doctors, that his heart is worn out and that he has 2 years to live. And instead of surrendering, he rages. He gets angry. He calls it nonsense. He goes to Atlanta and starts trying to lose 100 pounds. He gets in the gym for an hour a day. He keeps taking bookings. He flies to Tokyo and wrestles a 6-man tag, gets dropped on his head, finishes the match anyway, and collapses only after the bell. He walks away from the ring he loved most in the world, the thing he called his first and greatest love, purely so he might live long enough to meet grandchildren who did not yet exist. He rolls the dice on open-heart surgery. He survives it. He tells the world he is feeling better. He fights off a severe case of pneumonia to the point where the doctors say he is improving. That is not the story of a man dying. That is the story of a man refusing to die, right up until the very last possible second, until his body simply could not hold the line any longer. He wanted to die in the ring. He did not get that. Instead, he died in a hospital bed in Denver, far from the roar of the crowd, quietly on a Monday night in June. There is a sadness in that gap between the death he imagined and the death he got. But there is also something fitting about it. Because in the end, Vader did not go out doing a splash off the top rope. He went out doing the hardest thing he had ever done. He went out having chosen, finally, to be Leon White. A father. A man who gave up the thing he loved most for the people he loved more. A man who spent his last 2 years not chasing one more moment of glory, but chasing a few more years of ordinary life. A grandfather he desperately wanted to become. The monster spent 30 years terrifying the world. But the man spent his final 2 years fighting for something gentler. For time. For family. For the chance to hold a grandchild. And even though his heart gave out before he could get everything he wanted, the fight itself was the point. The fight was always the point. It was the thing that made him Vader in the first place. The refusal to stay down. The willingness to keep going when any sane person would stop. He carried that same spirit from the football fields of Colorado to the riots of Sumo Hall, from the eye hanging out of his socket in 1990 to the hospital room in 2018. He was, from the beginning to the end, the last of a certain kind of performer. A genuine monster in an era that had a few of them. A man who made his body an offering to a sport that took everything and gave back a fraction. And when the final bell rang, when the 2-year clock the doctor set finally reached 0, He had spent every last thing he had. They do not make them like Vader anymore. The business is different now. Safer, more careful, more measured. And maybe that is a good thing. Maybe the world does not need men who push their own eyes back into their heads and keep wrestling. Maybe it is better that nobody spends 33 days in a coma and calls it part of the job. But it also means that something has been lost. A certain kind of legend. A certain kind of impossibility. The kind of performer who made you lean forward and wonder how any of it could be real, and then made you realize, uncomfortably, that most of it was. And in the years since, the recognition has slowly come. New generations of fans have gone back and discovered the tapes, the Japan matches, the WCW wars, the sheer impossible spectacle of a 400-pound man moving like an acrobat. His name comes up again and again in the endless debate over the greatest big man to ever wrestle. And for many, there is no debate at all. The answer is Vader, every time. His son has kept his memory alive. His peers still speak his name with a kind of reverence usually reserved for the truly untouchable. The monster who was feared in life has become, in death, something closer to a folk hero. A reminder of a rougher, wilder, more dangerous era of the business, and of the price the men of that era paid for the moments that made us gasp. For 30 years, when Vader's music hit and that masked mountain came lumbering toward the ring wreathed in smoke, people felt something primal. Fear. Awe. The sense that they were watching something genuinely dangerous, something that did not entirely belong in the safe, scripted world of entertainment. And in his final 48 hours, stripped of the mask, stripped of the smoke, stripped of everything that had made him a monster, he was still exactly that. A man who would not go down easy. A man who fought to the last beat. A man whose heart, after a lifetime of carrying a giant, simply gave everything it had. His name was Leon Allen White. The world knew him as Vader. And even death had to wait 2 full years, right on the doctor's schedule, just to finally take him down. If you made it this far, do the man a favor and remember him not just for the monster, but for the fight at the end. Like this video and subscribe for more hard-hitting wrestling documentaries. Until next time.